Welcome back, everyone, to The Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something that's probably been on your mind, too. You know how there's just so much stuff to watch these days? Movies, shows, videos, you name it. And we're wondering, is all this content, as they call it, actually changing how stories are told?
It's like we went from, carefully prepared meals to this huge, overwhelming buffet of content.
Yeah.
And that's got to have some effect on us.
I like that analogy. And to help us break it all down, we're going to be looking at the ideas of this YouTuber named Master Samwise. You might know him. He's got a huge following for his videos on film and storytelling.
And he makes this really interesting point. He says there's a big difference between, art that makes you think, challenges you a bit, and then just content, which he basically calls noise.
Yeah, and that makes me think about how some shows, I don't know about you, but I feel like I can just have them on in the background while I'm doing chores or whatever. They're not really meant to be deeply engaging.
Absolutely. And Master Samwise uses this Netflix show, Keep Breathing, as a perfect example of this. He says the writing's so basic, it's almost like they're assuming the audience can't handle anything more complex.
Oh, that's funny. I actually had that show on while folding laundry the other day. And yeah, not exactly something I'm still thinking about. But here's my question. Is this whole content thing really new? Haven't we always had, background noise, even if it wasn't called that?
That's a great question. And it's tough to answer. I mean, on the one hand, sure, we've had things like radio plays or even music that's just meant to be there, not something you really focus on. But Master Samwise is saying the sheer amount of stuff we have now, it creates this whole different environment. Like maybe our brains are getting used to constant stimulation, which could make it harder to really get into those stories that need more attention.
That makes sense. So what does this mean for the actual stories being made? Is Hollywood changing its approach because of this whole shift towards content?
Master Samwise thinks so, yeah. He believes studios are making content for the audience. They wish they had one that wants that constant stream of easy entertainment, not necessarily the audience they actually have, who might be looking for something more.
So he's saying there's this disconnect between what studios are churning out and what people really want.
That seems to be his argument, yeah. And he uses the superhero genre as a big example of this.
Interesting. I know he's had a lot to say about superhero films recently.
Right. He looks at, those early Marvel films, like the first Iron Man, the first Avengers movie. Those were huge successes, but then some of the more recent stuff hasn't done as well, at least not with critics.
And he seems to think this has something to do with studios trying to push certain agendas, like adding more female-led superhero movies, regardless of whether audiences are actually into that.
Yeah, that's one of his points that's gotten a lot of attention, that's for sure. He uses Wonder Woman as an example. He says, sure, it was a hit, but it didn't do as well as some of those male-led superhero movies that came out around the same time.
So he's suggesting that maybe studios are misinterpreting what audiences want when it comes to those kinds of films.
That's his take. Now, whether or not you agree with him, it does bring up some interesting points about how studios decide what movies to make. There's a lot going on there, money stuff, creative visions, what's happening in society.
Absolutely. And box office numbers don't tell the whole story either. Wonder Woman was huge in terms of representation, and it resonated with a lot of people, regardless of how it performed compared to other films.
For sure. The cultural impact of a movie, that's really important too. But Master Samwise's argument about studios chasing this ideal audience, even if it risks alienating their core fan base, the people who've been there from the start, it's something to think about, especially now when there's just so much competition for art.
That's a good point. I mean, if a studio is so focused on chasing trends and trying to appeal to everyone, do they risk losing what made their stuff special to begin with?
That's the question, isn't it? And that kind of leads us into another area that Master Samwise talks about, the whole world of adaptations. And he has some strong opinions about what's been happening there.
Oh, yeah, I've seen some of his videos on that. He's been pretty critical of some recent adaptations, particularly Rings of Power and the Halo TV show.
It seems like his main issue is that the people making those shows didn't really respect the original story. It's almost like they were trying to rewrite them for a different audience.
And he's got some pretty funny examples, too, like how Galadriel's personality is totally different in Rings of Power compared to, the books and the movies.
Oh, yeah, or Master Chief taking his helmet off in the first episode of Halo. For fans of the games, those moments just felt wrong, like they were changing something fundamental about the characters.
It's interesting because on one hand, you can see why someone might want to update a story or modernize it, make it relevant for a new audience. But on the other hand, if you change the stuff that made the original story so good, are you even really adapting it anymore?
That's the debate, right? Where's the line between being creative and staying true to what made the original story work?
And this goes back to what we were talking about before. Are studios so worried about getting the biggest audience possible that they're sacrificing the things that made those stories special to the people who already loved them.
That's the balancing act they have to figure out. And there's no easy answer. But I think Master Samwise is saying we should at least be talking. We should think critically about the choices studios are making and ask ourselves, are they really serving the stories, the creators, and the audiences in the best way?
For sure. It's easy to just watch whatever's put in front of us, but we do have a role to play in shaping what kinds of stories get told.
Absolutely. The choices we make, what we watch, what we support, what we talk about, it all sends a message to the people who make stories.
So it's not just about complaining when we don't like something. It's about being part of this, evolution of storytelling.
Exactly. And I think that's a good point to move on to the next part of what Master Samwise is saying, which is all about why we need more stories that actually make us think, not less. And here's the interesting part. He thinks this would actually be good for both the audience and the studio.
Okay, now that I got to hear more about why would a more engaged audience be better for Hollywood's bottom line? That doesn't seem to make sense at first glance. I think we need to unpack that maybe after a quick break to refresh our drinks and gather our thought. What do you say?
Sounds good to me.
We'll be right back.
So we were talking about how Master Samwise actually thinks it would be better for studios, like financially, if they made more of those thought-provoking stories, the ones that really stick with you.
Yeah, I'm still wrapping my head around that. It seems like it'd be easier to just make a bunch of stuff that people can just have on in the background, not really have to pay attention to.
I know, right? But he's saying that when a story really grabs you, it kind of becomes this thing you keep coming back to, You rewatch it, maybe you buy the merch, you definitely tell your friends about it, and all of that ends up making the studio more money over time.
So it's about creating something with lasting power, not just a flash in the pan.
Exactly. He thinks studios are underestimating what audiences are capable of. They assume people only want those easy, mindless stories, but maybe that's because that's mostly what they've been getting lately.
It's a good point. I mean, I know I personally get kind of tired of just scrolling through endless options and not feeling like anything really jumps out at me. Maybe we do want more substance, even if you don't always realize it.
And Master Samwise brings up the success of Dune as an example. I mean, that movie is pretty dense, deals with some big ideas, but it did really well at the box office.
Yeah. And it started so many conversations, people debating the themes and the symbolism, that kind of thing. It definitely wasn't just background noise.
And that's what Master Samwise is getting at. The stories that really resonate are the ones that we can't stop thinking about, that we want to analyze and discuss with others. They become part of the conversation, the cultural landscape, in a way that most content doesn't.
I wonder if studios are missing out by not realizing. Maybe they're so focused on churning out stuff that they're forgetting about the power of a really good, thought-provoking story.
It's definitely a possibility. Master Samwise believes that a truly engaged audience is way more valuable in the long run, both in terms of, loyalty and the money they'll spend.
Okay, so we've been talking mostly about movies, but this whole idea of content versus art seems like it would apply to TV shows too, especially when you look at all the adaptations out there.
Oh, totally. And this is where Master Samwise gets really fired up, especially when it comes to those recent adaptations like Rings of Power and the Halo TV show. He really goes off about how they basically stripped away all the complexity of the original stories to try and appeal to everyone.
And he does not hold back on the specifics, does he? Like, I love his rants about Galadriel's personality and Rings of Power being so different from, the books and movies.
Yeah, and what about Master Chief taking his helmet off in the very first episode of Halo? I mean, that was a huge deal for fans of the games. It felt like a betrayal, like they were changing something essential about the character.
It's tricky, though. On one hand, I get why someone might want to update a story, make it feel more modern, so it appeals to people who haven't seen or read the original. But at what point does it stop being an adaptation and just become something totally different?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Where's the line between creative freedom and, respecting what made the original story so good in the first?
And I feel like this ties back to what we were talking about before, about studios trying to please everyone and maybe losing sight of what made their stuff unique and appealing in the first place.
Yeah, that seems to be a recurring theme. Master Samwise is all about respecting the audience, trusting that they can handle complex stories, even in, a big budget TV show or whatever. He thinks that by dumbing things down, studios are actually doing a disservice to everyone involved.
So is he saying adaptations should never change anything from the source material? Should they be completely faithful to the original?
No, he actually acknowledges that adaptations have to make some changes because you can't always directly translate something from a book or a game onto the screen. It's just a different medium.
Right. Certain things might not work the same way.
But his main point is that the heart of the story, the spirit of the original, shouldn't be lost. Like the core themes, how the characters developed, the stuff that made the original story resonate, those should stay intact.
It all comes down to respecting the audience, trusting them to appreciate those layers and nuances.
Exactly. He thinks that by trying to simplify adaptations, studios are basically creating this boring landscape where everything feels the same. There's no depth, nothing that really sticks with you.
It's like that feeling when you leave a movie and you're like, wait, what even happened? You just kind of went in one ear and out the other.
Totally. Master Samwise believes that we deserve better. We can handle complex narratives, we want to engage with interesting ideas, and we crave those stories that, stick with us long after they're over.
So the question is, how do we get there? How do we move away from this whole content overload and get back to that kind of storytelling that really has an impact? What do you think?
Well, Master Samwise actually has some interesting ideas about that, some pretty practical suggestions for what viewers can do to help make that happen.
All right, I am definitely ready to hear this. This is the part where I always get stuck. Like, complaining is easy, but what can we actually do to change things?
Well, he starts by suggesting something we can all do right now, today. Just be more mindful about what we choose to watch. Like, before you hit play on anything, take a second to ask yourself, why am I watching this? Am I actually interested, or am I just looking for something to fill the side?
It's about being more deliberate with our choices,
Yeah.
Right? Not just passively absorbing whatever's put in front of us, but actually taking a moment to decide what stories we want to let into our lives.
Exactly. It's like being more intentional, right?
Yeah.
Choosing to spend our time and attention on stories that actually matter instead of just passively taking in whatever's easiest.
And that makes a lot of sense, but how do we actually put that into practice? What would Master Samwise say about, taking that next step?
Well, he actually gives a really interesting example. He talks about watching a nature documentary and how at first he was kind of half paying attention, just checking his phone, doing other stuff around the house.
I've definitely been there. It's easy to get distracted.
Right. But then he decided to really focus on the documentary. He put his phone away, sat down, and actually gave it his full attention. And he said it was a totally different experience.
I bet. I mean, I've noticed that even with narrative films or TV shows, if I'm multitasking, I miss so much of the detail, the little things that the filmmakers put in there.
Exactly. And Master Samwise is saying that when we make the effort to really focus, we become more aware of those nuances, those little choices that the creators made, and we get so much more out of the story.
So it's not just about what we watch, but how we watch it. It's about creating that space to really absorb and appreciate the story.
Absolutely. And, he even suggests taking it a step further. Like, if you really love a film or a show, watch it again, but this time, try to approach it from a different perspective. Maybe focus on the cinematography or the music or how the characters develop over time.
Oh, that's a great idea. I'm definitely guilty of just putting something on for background noise sometimes, but I can see how taking the time to really engage with it would make a huge difference.
He says it actually makes us better viewers overall. Like, the more we practice paying attention, the more attuned we become to quality. We start to notice those subtle details, the things that separate a truly great story from something that's just, okay.
So it's like we're training our brains to appreciate the good stuff.
Exactly. And he also talks about the importance of talking about the stories that matter to us, like sharing our thoughts with friends, recommending things to each other, writing reviews online, participating in fan communities.
Yeah, it's about spreading the word, right? Helping those stories find a wider audience.
Right. Because if we only talk about the stuff that's already super popular or, the things that are trending for whatever reason, then those are the only stories that get attention.
I know I'm much more likely to check out a movie or a show if a friend whose taste I trust tells me it's worth watching.
Me too. Word of mouth is powerful. And, Master Samwise makes this interesting point. He says that a lot of studios are actually kind of scared to take risks. They're so focused on making sure everything is instantly appealing to the biggest possible audience.
I could see that. It feels like everything is becoming a sequel or a remake or based on some existing property.
Right. And he says that if we want to see more original, thought-provoking stories, then we have to show the studios that there's an audience for that.
So it's about being more vocal about what we want, not just passively consuming whatever they put out.
Exactly. It's about sending that message that we're hungry for something more, something that challenges us, that stays with us, that makes us think. And, that brings us back to his final challenge, the one he leaves with the viewer.
Oh, yeah, the one where he asks us to put on our, studio executive hats.
Right. He wants us to imagine that we're in charge of a big studio. We have all the resources, all the talent, all the money. And knowing what we know now about this whole content versus art thing, how would we approach storytelling?
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
I think it would be tempting to just play it safe, to make the sequels and the remakes and all the things that seem like guaranteed moneymakers.
Totally. But Master Samwise challenges us to think bigger. Like, what if we took a chance on a story that was different? Something that maybe pushed boundaries a little, something that really made people...
I know that's the kind of studio I would want to be a part of, one that wasn't afraid to take risks and try new things.
And ultimately, that's what he believes will shape the future of storytelling. It's those choices, those decisions about what stories get told, what voices get amplified. Those are the things that matter.
It's a reminder that we're not just passive consumers. We actually have a role to play in shaping the kind of culture we want to live in.
And that's why he ends by reminding us that the power of storytelling, it's something that belongs to all of us. It's a gift, it's a responsibility, and it's something we should never take for granted.
Well said. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Master Samwise's ideas, I think the main takeaway is this. If we want to see more thought-provoking, engaging, meaningful stories out there, we have to be more active participants in the process.
It's about being mindful of our choices, paying attention to the stories that resonate with us, and sharing those stories with others.
And it's about supporting the creators who are brave enough to tell those stories, even if they're not the easy, obvious choices.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking out those stories that make you think, feel, and wonder.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'll see you next time for another exploration of the ideas that matter.